Well, welcome. So today we have a broadcast about some excellent tools from IDERA with Patrick O'Hallahan. I am Dr. Jeffrey Milofsky, and I will be leading this discussion today. And the topic is a webinar on 3 time-saving tips for database administrators. So what we'd like to do is to start out today with just some logistics for this. We highly encourage our listeners to send in questions as time goes on, and I'll be checking those and looking at those all through the broadcast, and when appropriate, probably at the last portion of the webinar today, I will go through those and make sure that we concentrate on them and have a give and take back and forth between Patrick and myself on how to make sure you get the information that you need. We're going to go through this, and again, the focus is on DBAs and using the tools, specifically DBArtisan from IDERA that Patrick is going to talk about. But first, I wanted to give a lay of the land type of baseline, and then that should put into perspective the type of technical topics and the world that we live in right now in relation to the tool set and how that's going to help. So if you look at the slides, you'll see that I have titled the section on ensuring integrity in multi-tool operational database environments. And that's a lot. So I'm going to break that down a little bit just to get started. So the integrity portion means a lot of things. And one of the first things that means is I want to bring out is that a lot of times in the data management world, words get their own connotation for a very specific niche of people that are working in a particular area. So database integrity will mean something to database administrators, and it will mean something different, slightly differently to data modelers who are off doing work, but it means something differently to somebody doing enterprise architecture, and then it means something differently to the managers of the overall system. And so what we want to do is to pull back and say, well, what does the word integrity actually convey? And what it actually conveys is that everything is in order and we can trust it. So there's no loose pieces. It's not falling off on one side in lieu of the performance of another side. And so then that sense of the word integrity can carry through to the very specific work that you're doing as a DBA. But as you're doing the work as a DBA, it has to fit within the larger construct of your organization. And that's really what we're focused on today in terms of where these modern corporate data environments are moving. And that gets us into the next portion, which is multi-tool. So why do we talk about multi-tool? Well, multi-tool means many things. At one level, it means that there'll be different database vendor engines operating. Well, that's not unusual. What's a little bit more unusual that's coming forward in today's environments is that the different database engines will be serving possibly the same purpose. So instead of having one for production and you concentrate on that one, and then one for dev test and you concentrate on that one, you can now have multiple types of database engines serving production, because production has now become variegated, meaning that we go to analytic dashboards and we're now going to tune the performance and the cost to the organization of which vendor is most appropriate to that, versus ad hoc query versus maybe computing some data cleansing or something like that. And then again, the focus is always on the operational environment. So we were talking about efficient administration. That's really the topic we're talking about. So the main topics we want to get at, and then I'm going to seed your thought process on as we go forward, and you can ask some questions about, is why do we need greater efficiency? What's happening now that we say we need greater efficiency? Everybody likes to be efficient. Particularly if it's your personal work time, and if you can get some hours back in your workday or make life a little bit easier so you can enjoy a longer lunch break, well, that's a wonderful thing. But then there's another type of need for efficiency, which is that the world around you is changing. So there could be greater demands on you and your team to do more work, but you're not getting any more resources per se, but the amount of work, the complexity of work, the ramifications of that work are all growing. And that is a major component of the growth of today's modern data environments. So then what are the primary issues consuming that time and effort? So if we recognize that there's these demands growing, then we want to break that down and say, okay, what's really happening? And what are the issues that affect my work and my team's work, so that you can start to understand what you could possibly do about them. What are the opportunities? Where can I go? What can I reach out to? And then I want to get to the last two bullets, which are really where I'm laying the baseline here, and then I'll hand it off to Patrick, is what do these issues actually mean? I mean, so there's a lot of conversation that occurs oftentimes. It's very natural for these groups like a DBA. There's a culture around DBAs. There's terminology that's used within the DBAs. And one of the issues that I deal with a great time, I run a lot of consulting and development efforts, primarily in the big data arena. And so I have experience building the servers, tuning the servers, developing enterprise software, running the software, running the jobs, fixing problems in database queries, crashes. So I'm very well aware of what these different communities have to do, and particularly the database side, that people working on the databases. So we want to know what these issues are actually referring to. And one of the issues that does crop up that impedes each of these different working groups is that you always need the work and the knowledge of your colleagues. So you can't live within a bubble, within your little niche. Well, as you go to communicate across those, and the most obvious one, time-tested one, is, okay, so I need to know what's going on. I need to know the business requirements. And there's some communication gap that occurs there, and that's age old. But now if you put that within your time-stressed work zone, any lack of clear communication can cause you to do the same job many times. So we want to understand what that's all about, and then that opens up the opportunity space for you to then say, okay, I really do need to get some help here. I really do need to help me, because I'm not just going to do it one time. I'm probably going to have to do this thing 5 times, because I have to work in conjunction with multiple other groups in my organization. And then finally, as we'll just kind of permeate the conversation today, is what is industry common knowledge? Lots of really smart, experienced people out in the world. So let's take advantage of what they know. So some challenges with modern databases. So these are summary statements, and each one is a major issue today. So we're not going to dive too deeply into each of those. But as a summary statement, then we're shifting to a multi-tool environment. And that means multiple things, as I said at the outset. So one thing that it means is that you may or may not already be using. The likelihood is either you're using it already or you soon will be, depending upon the size of your organization. But we're moving into big data type of databases. And just one example, because I have a lot of experience with it, is the Impala database. And there are multiple types of big data databases, which is a challenge in unto itself, because a lot of these databases for the big data world were built from the ground up to service that environment, which means that they are all different enough in the core technology of what they're doing. The basic technology is always the same, because they have to run on servers and take data and store it efficiently and query it and all that. But how they go about doing that is very much specific to what they're trying to accomplish. And an example is Impala. Impala was built to service real ad hoc queries in a cluster node, a big data cluster node, a Hadoop node, and that means it does that well, but there's other things that it's not been built for, so it doesn't do well. And the ramifications of that, which we'll get into when Patrick talks about what his capabilities really are, it means that this creates some problems, because now I can't rely on it for everything, so I have to use other databases for other things, Oracle, MySQL, MongoDB, and now there are very specific issues about how I can get the same data and use it across multiple database engines. And how do I keep that all consistent? There's that word integrity again. What happens is the next day, next week, the business people do a change. The next bigger one is the growth of hybrid architectures, and I'm going to show some specific slides on that. We've been doing multiple presentations on this topic alone. This is a very big issue, so I'm going to talk about that. And by hybrid here, we specifically mean about mixing outsourced cloud type of environments and also on-premise, and having the proportion of what data and what ad hoc queries, what analytic dashboards are being serviced by either one vary over time because it's still early. So who's going to keep that aligned? Who has to service that? Who has to make sure it's working in production? The answer, the people that we're talking about today, the DBAs. We have to service that. We have to provide that. So these are new requirements coming on for you. So we want to open up the capability so that you have more efficient tools at your disposal so you can service this properly. The other one, which is always true, you could use this third bullet in almost everything going back 30 years, is that the business people want things faster. That's a cycle time. And so what does faster mean? Well, faster means a combination of what business people really, really want, which is oftentimes not what they're telling you. So there's that issue. But it also means what can feasibly be done. So in years past, what was feasible to do might have been, well, it's going to take a month or 2 months because there's a lot of work and a lot of risk in making significant changes to the production environment. But now that has changed. So now we're talking about faster cycle time, and like, no, I'm waiting in 2 weeks. I want to see a whole new analytic dashboard stood up. I want to be able to move some of our on-premise data to the cloud, and I want to do it in a particular way. So we're now saying, okay, it can't just be done the old way. We don't have the luxury of 90-day or 6-month time periods in which we can get together, do a design, do a gap, go and prove it out, do dev test, and roll it out. We're going to have to shrink those timelines. The next one, which is really the world that I inhabit greatly, is the many variations of data sets for customized dashboards and analytics. So I'm a former research scientist, and I'm an expert in doing data processing and data mapping and all that stuff. And so one of the challenges there that I see 100% of the time is that it's what I call embedded semantics in the data itself. If you open up, you imagine these are all like cans of spinach, and you open up the different cans, there's enough slight variations actually inside the cans that are nowhere described on the label. But in order to make them work properly, you got to know them. You got to figure them out. That means that you're knee deep into the data itself and doing some reverse engineering and some forensics in real time. And that was not part of the original project plan. So whenever the impetus occurred to say, let's go do something new, people are unaware of these type of situations. And so then this is just extra work that's thrown on you that you have to do. And the time was actually not really allotted for in the project plan. So again, that's another driver in order to have the tool set that makes you more efficient. And then finally, the last one is something that can no longer be ignored. And depending upon the industry that you're in, you may or may not have been ignoring it anyway. Even if you say we come from a highly regulated industry like financial services, then if you look at the lessons learned and the after action reports of the 2008 meltdown, specifically like some stories of some of the companies that had trouble, they weren't practicing what they were preaching, let's put it that way. So now there's new laws and new regulations coming along, like the European Union GDPR, which means you can't ignore it. The ramifications for truly not doing it and having full and open compliance audit tracking is severe. So one of the things I want to show here is that from the DBA point of view is where does this go? So I'm going to pull in of it, specifically Jim, trying to pull in things that are common in the industry. And so this one I thought was good from Oracle University. And on the left-hand side, we say tomorrow's database is here. And that's interesting because we think of Oracle as supplying for a long time a pretty traditional relational database, and it does great things for what it's built for, and they constantly improve the capabilities of what they're providing. But there's a whole other world of databases that are outside of the relational database world, and that's growing. So there always were some, but now the preponderance of that is growing. And so there's a mix and match going on. But even with that, what they're talking about here, I thought was very good, and it's presented very clearly. So you notice all these different aspects that have to be dealt with from managing the database server. We got that. But the next one down is security. And yes, security has always been there, but again, the importance, the criticality of security, improving it after the fact. I mean, we're getting so jaded by the data breaches nowadays. So what was it, last week or just a few days ago, Marriott was breached for 500 million records. I mean, at this point, I might as well just like put out all my personal ID and put it on my mailbox and say, whoever wants it, come and take it. Between nation states like China and Russia taking it and these data breaches, I mean, everything is just out there. But the but of that is that is engendering greater and more strict laws and regulations, which will hold people ever more stringently accountable, not just to prevent a breach, because the truth is a lot of these breaches are being done by large organizations. So the nation states, Russia and China and others who lead this, it's not like they hired 3 people and put them in the back with pizza and soda. They could have 1,000 people working, and they're all smart. They're all educated. They're all smart. So it really is an attack plan. And so you need to stay up on that. And one of the things, because this is something I do in a secure financial environment, you have to prove that you took all the steps that were prudent with documentation, so that if it happens, yeah, it might happen, but you have to prove that you did everything right. And that proof is not sitting down at a table and telling somebody I did everything right. It's having all the documentation. It's having screenshots. It's going through a 1,000 item list of all the industry and government standards that you have to adhere to. It's a very large amount of work. So that is something to concentrate on. And if you haven't been doing a lot of that now, you very likely will be in this near term. And then the other ones that you see there, and then we're going to focus on the SQL statement tuning. And again, that means a lot. So it goes beyond just saying, hey, let's create a better SQL syntax. Another place that I readily inhabit is where the queries are either complex and or dealing with enormous quantities of data. And so it's regular to have the database crash, just boom. And those are due to out-of-memory effects on one type or another. So you're going to have to be doing some troubleshooting and looking into that. On the right-hand side, we see this overview, which I thought was kind of nice, is to sum it all up, is, the buckle up for the cloud. Just like we talked about, it's not going to be ignored. It's going to be brought in more and more into traditional business data environments. The developers, so there's going to be this faster cycle time. So it says there, make friends with developers, but it's really a larger party. So think of your holiday party where you have the accountants and the people doing enterprise architecture and the developers and your administrators. Well, you're going to need constant communication between them. So it's very worthwhile to give someone a gift card and create that conduit. And a lot of times that back channel collegial approach can make life many times easier. And then never stop learning, because obviously the world of technology is changing rapidly. So some of the primary issues that we have to deal with are to get down a little bit further to talk about some of the specifics, and then this is really a way to step into handing it off to see what Patrick is going to talk about with IDERA, is that we're maintaining data models, and there we're talking about logical and physical data models across different tools with frequent changes for different use cases. Oh my goodness, that's tremendous. So I know a lot of data modelers and DBAs and enterprise architects, each of which would happily say that if you ask them to deliver their product in under 6 months, that's like crisis response team. Oh my God, how could we possibly do that? And then, but those days are not going to exist anymore. Again, that's done. Not only that, but the enterprise architecture has to be tightly wedded to the data models, and that has to be tightly wedded to the schemas inside the databases themselves. And each of those three fields has specific requirements that they're juggling. Now you got to juggle them over all of them. So you need some way to keep that all in line. And oh, by the way, every 2 or 3 weeks, there's a new request that comes in from the business side that says stand up a new analytic dashboard, or we have changed the number of fields that we have to track. Oh, by the way, we decided to change the required value syntax. So previously we had a code and it was the concatenation of 3 other codes, and we decided that starting next week we're going to break that up and you have to handle that. So that's all real world stuff, and that's all very, very complicated and down in the weeds. So you're really going to need some help with that. The other one are the ever-present connectivity. How do you get across this hybrid cloud and on-premise? And now what we're also seeing is that the security controls that will be placed on those networks are going to be increasingly more rigid. And that gets down to the core issues of ports and protocols and packet transfers. And one of the things that happens as a DBA is that it may be working perfectly today, and then tomorrow it's not working. It may work at 9 a.m. and stop working at 11 a.m. And why is that? Well, sometimes it's because for security reasons, there's a different routing that might occur and nobody told you. And that's happened to me innumerable times. And so even though I'm not in charge of network routing or cybersecurity, it was incumbent upon me to do the troubleshooting, collect the evidence, to go back to the network people to say, I have proof that this is on you, so please correct it. And that took a lot of time. And so again, you need more tools, you need more visibility into these complex areas. Another one is moving data, and it's not just database systems. A lot of times the data starts out in files, and then you put it into a database system or you take it out, and then you have to move it across. And there are the obvious things that have been dealt with for a long time. So you have to move it across databases. Okay, that's fine. Each one's a little bit different. It's never a trivial problem. But now you have the other problem, is that if you have done schema tuning, which means that you have created schemas in specific database engines, and it's done that to make it more efficient and space efficient as well in that particular engine, there may be things that don't marry up across other database engines. And I'll come back to Impala for sake of example, is that there were specific data types that just don't exist in Impala because that's not what it was built for. So if you were depending upon those data types and had used those data types as part of some complex SQL query that may even be in a stored procedure that's being run in production, now you can't use it. Now that's up in the air. And all those places that are using that have to be ferreted out, have to be modified, have to be tested. And then you have to ask the question, is it worthwhile moving away from those stringent fixed data types into a more generic approach? And that is actually what is being done in a lot of big data engines. They're moving away from strong data types to always have it as strings, and there's examples of that. And yes, there's a higher overhead, but then that higher overhead was dealt with from the design of the engine itself. So string processing is always slower, but if I built it into my engine, then I can pick that back up, and now I don't have to fight the battle of those strong data types. Not saying that that is exactly something that you will deal with, but that is going on, and so it's out there, it's in the world, and that's one of those details you want to be aware of. And again, I come back to something I've seen often is the DBAs are not always given all the information that would be helpful to do their job efficiently. So sometimes you're put in the position that you're going to have to discover this information on your own. Then we get into the obvious performance issues when we're doing queries or we're relying on the database engine to do transformations, actually having the database do ETL versus external tools. So there's a choice there, and then dashboards. And then we all know that databases perform very differently depending upon the use case. So querying data for analytic dashboards is very different than doing, let's say, online transactional processing. That's obvious, but even for doing ad hoc queries. If the data set is small and the number of concurrent users is small, it may not be something noticeable, so it's not that big a deal. But if it becomes, either of those grow, then you can actually see that becoming a significant problem that you have to deal with. And then finally, if you're going to look at those 4 bullets and really think about what you have to do with them, there's going to be a lot of manual work embedded within that, a lot of things you have to do. And again, if you keep having to change it, the iteration cycle is now faster. You have to do it every 2 weeks or every week. You would really like some way of, once you figure out what you have to do, is a simple way that you can make it repetitive in an automated fashion. But even if you do that, you have to have some good management interface so that when you automate and schedule these jobs, you can monitor it, and you can even monitor the performance of the automation itself. So in the last few minutes here, to get into some of the items that I think, just because I've heard people be a little bit confused about this, is the difference between a data model and a schema. A data model, as the word model suggests, is providing a larger view of the world. So you're providing a level of abstraction. And then we know that there's different types of models. There's conceptual, logical, and physical, and those are pretty intuitive terms about what you're focusing on. And then we get down to the schema, which is really that very specific unit that is controlling that very specific database. And then the instance data is the actual data in that database. So all these factors are going on and playing a role here. And remember this, depending if you're in a large organization, you probably have a team of professional data modelers. And then you're focused on the schema and you work with them. Some of the more up-to-date tools will handle that transfer within the tool, but still there's enough details that go on across that boundary that you need something to keep track of that. And then another one is this graphic here, which I took out because it was just a presentation that we did recently that I led, and I thought it was a good visual to let you see what a hybrid cloud data architecture looks like, at least one view of it. And you can see what we're talking about. We're really talking about a seamless way to securely go across the open internet and have data be managed, data systems be managed and operate, where some of them are in on-premise data centers with all the security and controls that go around that, and then going off to outsource cloud environments. And again, this is just one view of that, and so the proportion will go back and forth. Some of the major topics that go along with this, as you see, the security, the life cycle, and the consistent security and governance. And it's the 2 words I'll really focus on here to throw out is the word life cycle and consistent. So when you view it in terms of a life cycle, what does it mean? It means you have to track, manage, document from start to finish, but it also implies you're going to be doing it again. So it's that againness, which is really a critical driver for the need for greater efficiency, as is the word consistent. Some of the ideas, and these are particularly hit home for DBAs. I'm not going to read all these, but you'll see some of the items under number 3, the workloads, which we're going to talk about in just one more minute, is long-running jobs. I've had jobs running because they're big data jobs for 10 hours. And then there might be some issues, performance issues, not just because they're running for 10 hours, but why? What happens? Is it going to crash at 9 hours and a half? Things like that. So this is the real world, and this is the things that have to be focused on. And then finally, for performance troubleshooting, which is something I think that Patrick will focus on, this was just a good summary statement that came out of the Microsoft site. And again, I'm not going to read this. I'm just pointing out that part of your job is that this is complicated. This is not simple stuff. And then this is for one database engine doing one thing. So now multiply that by all the different database engines and the greater time pressure that comes in. And so this is one is from Oracle, showing one of the things that I always found interesting is that it's doing an optimizer. That's no great shakes, that's obvious. But on the right-hand side, it is actually deciding to modify the query syntax on its own. And modern software programming language compilers do this as well. That's great when it works, but that also makes it much harder for you to troubleshoot the root causes if something goes wrong, because things are changing. So you need to be aware of what's going on, and you need to have some deep visibility into what's going on under the covers. And then finally, this leads me to the last part, which I'll hand off, is that this is an actual view of IDERA's DBArtisan, and showing one of the areas that I would most appreciate, which is like if you go down to the bottom, the bottleneck analysis, is that this is a type of information you really need out in front of yourself so that you can not just monitor it and creating baselines on good days, but particularly when something happens, you have a much faster way to get inside and see what's going on. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Patrick, and he can take over.
All right, thank you, Jeffrey. Let me show my screen. There were a lot of good points there, and it made me think of a fact I heard a long time ago, which is that it takes 7 years to paint the Golden Gate Bridge, and the paint lasts for 7 years, meaning they're never done painting it. And one good takeaway from Jeffrey is that being a DBA is the same. It takes so long to learn it all, but by the time you learn it all, you have to start over because so much has changed. What I want to talk about today is DBAs, what they do. Obviously, you're DBAs, you know what you do, but I'm going to speak in general terms about the kinds of roles and tasks DBAs have to do. I want to talk also about IDERA's DBArtisan and how it fits in with what DBAs do. And then at the end, I want to show you 3 specific things that DBArtisan does. It does a lot of things. But I want to show you how you can use it to manage multiple instances, be they homogeneous or across multiple vendors, how to schedule and automate jobs, and how to replicate and sync data and schemas between different machines. Jeffrey talked about efficiency. Automating things is a great way of being efficient, being able to get more done in less time, automate repetitive tasks, also introducing fewer mistakes. There's a huge quality at the corporate level on quality. Years ago, it was limitations on CPU and memory and disk and things that DBAs tended to focus on making things run faster. With Moore's Law, with computing doubling, with memory getting cheaper, now the focus is more on, I want to make sure it's available and I want to make sure it works. Replicating tasks, automating tasks, being able to do things automatically rather than manually is a great way of reducing mistakes, reducing rework and things, which also, in addition, helps to make you more efficient. So when I talk about what DBAs do, and I was a post-sales consultant for 10 years in my last job role. Right now, I'm a sales consultant for IDERA. I worked with a lot of companies. Pretty much every other week, every 3 weeks, I was working with a new company in their IT department, typically working with DBAs. With system administrators. I had an opportunity to work with very, very small companies, very, very large companies. and see a lot of different things, some of which worked, some of which didn't work. The DBAs in general, whether it was them specifically or them as a team, had to provide certain services to the company. And those services I generally divided into two categories, but they had to do what I would call physical or infrastructure tasks, and they had to do what I would call application or logical tasks. But a lot of things are making that more complicated. Connecting to a variety of data sources. It used to be when I got started my first large data application, we had Informix running on an IBM server with a whopping 250 megabytes of memory, and everything ran on the server. The application ran on the server, the database ran on the server, everything was there. Now, because of the internet, because of modules and plug and play, DBAs are not just responsible for a single database, they're responsible for components. Maybe they're responsible for Microsoft SQL, and through acquisition or through third-party product, now they've got to learn MySQL. Maybe licensing on a database has changed, and the company, for financial reasons, is transferring to another database. There's a variety of data sources you have to connect to, some on cloud, some on premise. There's slightly subtle differences there. Got to monitor database performance, make sure things are working well, security, the usual backups and restore. There's a lot of different things the DBAs have to do, including not just doing their own work, but working with either other DBAs as part of a team or working as a cross-functional team as part of an application. I talked about physical DBAs or infrastructure DBAs, the kinds of tasks they do, basically making sure the database is up and running and available and has resources, making sure that data is moved around, backups, things are up and available, the disaster recovery plans are working, that the right people have right access to the data and not other people, and that as things go wrong, you get notifications and alerts alerting you to the infrastructure issues. There's also application issues, and again, I've heard this called application DBAs or logical DBAs. This is more concerned about the code that's running, stored procedures, making sure the data is consistent, those kinds of things. You may work in one of those areas, you may work in both of those areas. It just depends on the size of your organization. So I've seen these as very different siloed groups. Most of the time, it's one DBA or a small group of DBAs that are handling both of these types of tasks. Because of the variety of tasks, physical tasks, application tasks, there's a lot that goes into deciding what tools you want to use to help make your job more efficient, to improve the integrity of what you're doing so there's less rework, fewer mistakes. And some of the things you can do include automatically generating scripts, automating the running of them. The more automation, again, the fewer manual steps, the more easy it is to make sure the job gets done right the first time, especially when you're handling complicated environments, maybe new databases that you haven't been working with before, new vendors, you aren't quite sure the syntax. And again, depending on the DBA, you may be responsible for part of this or all of this. So you have to work as part of a team to help you get these tasks done, as well as just general performance monitoring, looking at the resources being consumed, looking at, in the case of Oracle, hard parse ratios versus soft parse ratios. In the case of Microsoft SQL, looking at the dynamic views to get an idea of cache hit ratios, what resources are being used, and how fast, how much you're waiting on log writers. All these are definitely considerations that having a tool that exposes you to these metrics helps you identify root causes and helps you resolve problems faster. So DBArtisan does a lot of these things. DBArtisan has about a 20-year development history behind it. We've gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of DBAs. If I had to sum up a few major points of DBArtisan, it's multi-platform. So you have one pane of glass for Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, Sybase, MySQL, a couple other databases, as well as generic JDBC servers So when you learn to use DBArtisan to modify tables, create users, modify security, migrate data, whatever it is you're doing, it doesn't have to be knowledge specific to a certain database vendor. It's all wizard driven. You can run through it. It generates the DDL or DML, shows you what that is at the end, and then allows you several different options on how you want to execute it. So again, if I'm a Microsoft SQL Server DBA, and I've seen this dozens of times in the last year, companies making an effort to move to MySQL just because the licensing costs of Microsoft SQL are getting so outrageous. I've got to migrate not just applications, not just data, but I've got to learn the underlying syntax, the differences between Microsoft SQL and MySQL. So when I do things like work with security, work with tables, work with partitioning, work with clustering, I need some help in helping me understand what the exact syntax of that is. Going down to the second bullet, there are some built-in analytics with DBArtisan that help you with performance. Jeffrey touched on that on the one screen he showed. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of individual metrics that are collected. Different ones for Oracle, different ones for MySQL, different ones for Microsoft SQL, because obviously the underlying technology is different. But I can see sessions that are active. I can see blocking sessions. I can see what's going on right now, as well as I can create collections of statistics. If I'm interested in available memory, if I've got a highly data-intensive application and I'm concerned about buffer churn, I can set up counters. Basically, any counter that is available within the underlying technology, I can set up an analyst pack that collects those statistics, saves them over time, and then I can go look at graphs and reports, not just on what's happening right now, but what's happened over a period of time. Easily find and fix performance issues using intelligent diagnostics. In addition to the statistics, there are various alerts and findings that DBArtisan will present to you. So if anomalous behavior starts to happen, we can show you what's happening and give you advice on fixing it. One of the things I'm going to demonstrate today is moving schema and table data across different platforms. Maybe you've got a non-production database that needs to be refreshed. You've got a sandbox that developers play in, and maybe on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, you want to refresh that from production. I've actually tested this and done it just because I was curious. I took a Microsoft SQL schema and ported it to Oracle, the tables and the indexes and the data, and it went well the first time. There's some caveats on that, obviously, stored procedures and some specific syntax, and for example, partitioning and tables and things is specific to Oracle, but not to Microsoft SQL. But in general, if I need to migrate an application, a database, schema and data from Microsoft SQL to MySQL or to Oracle, DBArtisan does a lot of the work for you. Again, there's some specific vendor-specific attributes or things you may need to tweak, but it will do most of the work. And then in addition to all that, we'll see that we can work with data security for Microsoft SQL, Oracle, MySQL. They all handle security slightly differently, whether it's users or logins or what permissions you have to do selects, or in the case of MySQL, you can specify that users can connect from certain hosts. Again, all that is built into this single pane of glass. So as you move from vendor to vendor and do these tasks, it's all wizard driven. So you just fill in the blanks, and at the end, DBArtisan will give you the DDL, which you can execute or do with what you want, copy it into a change control system, attach it to a ticket, whatever you need to do. We'll see when we get into the live demo. There's just a couple slides left, and then we'll jump into that. There's an object tree navigation. So all the objects available in the database, be they partitions or table spaces or users, procedures, functions, constraints, sequences, all the objects that are available within each of the databases. And again, they're different from vendor to vendor. All of those will be available within the GUI. By clicking and right-clicking, you can inspect them, change them, modify them. Real-time performance dashboards, both in addition to what's happening right now, what sessions are running, what wait events are being generated, what blocks are happening, those kinds of statistics. I can set up analyst packs where I can gather statistics over a period of time and do analysis over time. And that's the last one, the space and capacity analyst functions as well. I can look and see how tables are growing, how indexes are growing, how they're getting fragmented, and so on. There's a very functional ISQL editor embedded within it. So either I'm importing files, SQL files that someone has given me, I'm copying and pasting the DDL or DML that's been generated from these wizards I talked about. I'm writing SQL from scratch. There's a visual query builder as well where I can drag and drop tables and create joins. I've got a fully functional ISQL editor built in. I can run commands, step through them. In the case of procedures, I can debug them. I can set breakpoints. I can watch variables and change them. I can do testing and debugging and debug stored procedures as well. And then at the bottom half of the screen, execution facilities, they've got the ability to run scripts, and this is one of the things I'll show off, against multiple targets. So if I've made a change, if I've modified data, if I've added a user, if I've modified a table, I can select multiple instances, then hit a button, and it will run that script against multiple targets all at the same time. DBArtisan also integrates the built-in utilities that come with the various products. So with Oracle, I've got various data pumps and images like that. With Microsoft SQL, I've got access to the backups and things like that. I've also got some generic tools that work across, some DBArtisan specific tools for data loads, data imports, backups, recoveries, and comparing and syncing schemas and data as well. And again, I'll show you all those are. I think of the last bullet, one of the nice features about DBArtisan is that as you do all these things, as you modify, as you manipulate things, create objects, change security, all the SQL code that's doing this is exposed. You can see it on the screen before you run it. It also is logged to a file. So if you've done something and then 5 minutes later you go, oh, wait, I ran something, I wanted to go see what it was, I can go back to a log file, I can look and see every single SQL script that has been running. In summary, Jeffrey talked about efficiency and integrity, and I would add one more thing with the corporate focus more on quality. It's important to be able to do things right the first time, and do them quickly. A lot of that is automating tasks. A lot of that is having tasks generated for you so you don't have to manually drag and drop and type. Second button is manage many tasks from one console. Again, whether it's Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, Sybase, MySQL, all of these can be managed from a single pane of glass. And lastly, the address performance issues, the real-time analysis of what's happening right now. What are people doing in my database right now? There's the question DBAs get every single week. Every single environment I've worked in, any DBA who's doing any kind of production support, they get the phone call, hey, something's happening. Can you tell me what's going on? And that's all they get. There's abundant tools within DBArtisan to be able to go look, see what's happening right now. Who's running SQL? What are they doing? What wait events are being generated? Is it a systemic issue across multiple sessions? Is it one particular user that's running some ad hoc query that's taking up all the resources? Or to be able to go to the analyst packs and look over time and see, am I running out of memory? Am I running out of disk? Those are some of the key features of DBArtisan. So I've talked about the general functions that DBAs have. In some cases, it's DBAs are specifically physical DBAs, infrastructure DBAs, or they are application DBAs responsible for ensuring the health and efficiency of the application. 90% of the time, DBAs are wearing both of these hats. It's only been a couple times where I've actually seen physically isolated groups, but I'm going to walk through 3 specific things you can do with DBArtisan. I'll point out some other features as I go along. But managing multiple databases, either a single vendor or multiple vendors. And everyone's got production, QA, load test, dev, a staging environment, these different databases. And a lot of times you have to make changes to all these databases all at the same time. Maybe you're pushing out a new release. Maybe you've made a change, or there's a patch that needs to go out to a cluster. Whatever it is, there's a lot of times you need to do the same thing to multiple servers. Second thing I'll demonstrate is automating and scheduling jobs. Again, the old Unix joke about system administrators, it's the lazy administrators who get all the work done and make all the innovations because they're the ones who are automating and scheduling everything. If there's any kind of repetitive task at DBAs, you can use DBArtisan to generate a script and then run it once, run it at a scheduled time, or run it on a regular schedule. And then lastly, I'll show you about refreshing data and schemas, how to identify a source, identify a target, and then sync up the data or the schemas or both. Again, maybe you're refreshing a non-production environment for developers who have a sandbox and they're doing destructive tests, and you've got a regular task of resyncing and reloading the data to make it production-like. So I will jump to my live system. I do not have it up and running. So let me start it. It is a Windows application. I thought I had it up and running, but here's DBArtisan version 17. Again, it's about to get up to 20-year development history behind it. Windows-based application. It installs from a wizard, very simple. I'll talk a little later. There's a free trial you can get that allows you to try this fully functional trial for 2 weeks. But it's a Windows-based application. I've got menus across the top. I've got shortcuts across here. I've got data sources here. And you can see I've organized my data sources by vendor. So I've got some Microsoft SQL. I've got some MySQL and some Oracle, various databases I'm connected to. And the first thing I want to show you is managing multiple databases. So let's say I've got a change I've made. Let's say there is a change I'm making on the staging environment. I can right-click on here and say connect, and it now connects. This little inverted red triangle means I'm now connected to here. One of the bullets I talked before talked about the browser. This is the browser. So I've got the databases here. I've got all the objects in the database. And again, this is Microsoft SQL. These folders I just created this way. It's an arbitrary hierarchy of folders. They could be based on application. They could be based on data center. They could be based on on-premise versus cloud. I just happen to organize these by vendor. But obviously, the objects in the database are going to be slightly different depending on whether I'm looking at Oracle or Microsoft SQL or MySQL. But I can look at the tables. I can do various things with these tables. Edit data. I can, let's say I open this, and I've got a wizard here that shows me the various attributes of this table. If I were creating a table, I could right-click here and say Create New Table. I would have these same tabs. These tabs are specific to Microsoft SQL. If I did this in Oracle, if I did this exact same thing, opened this up and opened up a table there, there might be some extra tabs there for blobs, object blobs. There might be some things for partitioning that are specific to to Oracle. But these are specific attributes to Microsoft SQL. So again, I don't need to know the exact syntax. And that's very handy if I'm moving into a new technology. So here's the existing table. I can add columns. I can move columns. I've got the DDL here. And this shows me the DDL for creating this object. So here's the table, some procedures, some indexes, constraints, all the things I need to do to create this object. They're all available right there. But let's say I want to change this. And let's say I just want to get rid of this column. So I delete this column. It hasn't done it yet. But if I go to the DDL, it'll show me the DDL for creating this object as it exists now. Instead, I'm going to click on this button that says Alter, and I'm going to show you this is the DDL for taking the existing object and modifying it to look like the way I've modified it. So if I've changed a column, I've deleted a column, if I've added a column, I've got the DDL here. I can copy this and paste it. Maybe I've got a change control system I need to go through to change this. Maybe if I've changed any of these other attributes, the right DDL shows up here. So I can use this maybe not to get the work done, but maybe just to create these statements. And again, if it's got to go in front of a change approval board or some other organization, I've got a way of automatically creating this. And this is a pretty straightforward one. Let me undo what I just did. And I've got my column back. And just to show you what some of the capabilities, let's say I move this column up here. Now, there's no immediate way of doing this in Microsoft SQL. And in fact, if I look at the alter, you can see what it's doing now. It's creating what we call an extended alter. It's going through and it's dropping constraints, dropping procedures, dropping more constraints, renaming the table, then creating the table with the column in the correct location. It's moving all the data from the renamed table back to the original table, and then it's re-adding all the constraints and indexes. So with a couple clicks, I've done something pretty complicated, and I've got this massive amount of DDL here done now that when I'm done, if I click execute there, it would essentially move this column up to here. I'll hit refresh and move that back to where it was. And this is true of whether I'm looking at tables, I'm looking at indexes, I'm looking at security, any of these objects. I can right-click on procedures. I've got this same wizard-driven approach. So if I need to modify a sequence and it's in Oracle and I don't remember the exact syntax, well, I can right-click on it there. I can modify it, I can create it, and I've got the DDL exposed. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you is this tree of objects and how I can go and look at objects. Let me go back. Let me do this. Let me just delete this, keep this simple. And here's my DDL for dropping that column. And I said before, I can execute this right now. I can schedule this to run later. Instead, I'm going to copy this. And again, I can paste this into a ticket for a change. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this blank page, which is the ISQL editor. I mentioned it briefly during discussion. I'll paste this in here. And I've got quite a few icons available here. If I've got a series of statements here, I can execute them one at a time. This is a stored procedure. I can debug it, meaning I can set breakpoints. I can watch variables and do things like that. I'm going to click on this little world icon. And this is the interesting part. I'm only connected to one data source right now. So if I uncheck this, I've got all of my Microsoft SQL data sources available. I can now run this on multiple databases, multiple instances very quickly. So if I've got a change I've made and I want to replicate that change, and again, that change could be to a table. Maybe it's adding a user. Maybe it's changing security, changing a sequence. Maybe I've modified data. I'll show you that in 1 second. I've got the ability here to quickly replicate that change across multiple databases. And again, the more I automate this, the more efficient I am, the more integrity there is. The fewer mistakes I make, less rework I have, the less potential catastrophic events happen. The fewer catastrophic events. I mentioned changing data. I'll just click on here and say edit data. I can select various columns. I can put in a where clause. I can edit data a line at a time or multiple lines at a time. So I'll just do this. And notice that as I change data here, change to a Y, that's odd. I'm getting down here, the DML. I'm getting the actual updates that are needed to make these changes. Maybe my application is data integrity is very important. There's configuration parameters. There's various other things that people need. I can use this editor to modify data, visually verify it's the way I want to change it. And now I can do the same thing. I can take this, I can cut it, I can open up another ISQL window, paste it in there, and run that against multiple databases.
That's great. We only have a couple minutes left, so
okay.
Why don't I ask you, we can leave that open. I'll ask you a couple of questions so that the people listening can get their answers, and then maybe you can show a few things right after that as much.
Okay.
So I think to jump ahead, people might have experience with other tools like Toad, which is popular, where they have to go and jump across multiple tools within Toad to deal with different databases. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so that's right, Jeffrey. Toad has a separate tool for Oracle, a separate tool for Microsoft SQL, a separate tool for all the different databases. This is all one pane of glass, and this is side by side running MySQL versus running Oracle. I've connected here. That's what the little inverted triangle is. I can do exactly the same thing with Oracle that I was doing with Microsoft SQL. Again, the wizard's going to be slightly different because some of the vendor-specific parameters are different. But for scheduling jobs, for running the ISQL editor, for moving data, for replicating changes, I can even here when I'm running this, I can run this against multiple databases. If for some bizarre reason I have some SQL code I want to run on Oracle and SQL Server, I can do that as well. So it's all one pane of glass. It's all integrated. If this tool is being used by multiple DBAs on the same team, and some of them are responsible for Microsoft SQL, some of them are responsible for Oracle, you have the same tool, you have the same vocabulary, you can pass resources back and forth as well.
That's great. And then the comparing databases, is there a simpler way? So let's say I don't want to sync right away. I just want to do a comparison. I just kind of want to have some view of what's really different, and then maybe put that out so I can share it with the others or work on it later. Is there an easy way to do that?
Yeah, we're running out of time, so I'll just do, I set up this before, but I've got a schema migration that allows me to select a source and a target, allows me to select the databases within the targets, allows me to select the object types that I want to migrate, as well as the specific objects. And I'll just show you that here on this list of options I have, where I can copy the users, retain the users, copy data, not copy data. I can just check this, and now what it will do is it will generate a script. It won't execute it, but it'll generate a script that'll show me what needs to be run to bring the target in sync with the source. If I leave that unchecked, it will go ahead and automatically execute that. So this is a simple way of, again, if I need to create the script but not run it for change control purposes or something, or just to give it a sanity check, I can run this utility to sync up schema and data from a source and a target and not actually execute it, but just generate a script, as well as a report.
Yeah, that's excellent. And then one follow-up to that is for more formal organizations where you really, as I talked about, audit, the need for audit tracking. One of the primary controls that are in both government and industry standards, like various ISO standards or the NIST standards, is version control. And it's version control. Version control has multiple facets, right? One is version control in a team, so you don't step on each other's toes. But again, for now, the world of regulatory compliance and audit tracking. So is this easy to do this type of work and have it fit within the version control system?
Yeah, I don't have this set up, but you can set up a version control system, and you can select a database, and you can either integrate with Microsoft has a standard called MISCI, the Microsoft Source Control Interface, software source control interface. I can either integrate with an existing one and pull in the files. Maybe I've got the DDL for the schema archived in a VCS system, VCS. I can integrate with that and then pull those in. If I don't have that, I can identify an existing database or instance and pump those out to VCS. With that, I've got the usual features of, I don't think I can see it here because I'm not integrated with it, but if there are procedures or tables or other things, I can right-click, I can check out, I can check in, I can merge, add comments, do all the typical things. So if my application schema, procedures, everything is under control system, VCS, yes, I can integrate either with an existing system, or I can create a baseline from a database that isn't in VCS yet.
Okay, cool. And so one of the things that I'm going to throw in as a new question is that, because I've just been monitoring in the industry for a long time, is that it's always astonished me when, because of the complexity of things, the industry decides, hey, we want to teach non-technical people some technical things, which sounds like a lot of fun until you're on help desk duty 24 hours a day, right? So one of the things that I've noticed about what you were showing, and even though this is targeted to DBAs, is in reality, depending upon the type of organization, DBAs might be getting some of those incoming calls, or let's say have to be cleaning up the spilled milk on the floor from some people doing stuff. So it almost looks like, I know you haven't targeted this, but some of the functions you're showing almost makes SQL easier to master in a broader community.
Yeah, and as I said, under the tools, there is a visual query builder where I can select columns, I can select a schema. I'm in Oracle. Let me go back to Microsoft SQL. But again, I can drag tables, and it will visually automatically join the tables based on constraints and keys. So yeah, if I've got a new schema I'm not familiar with, or if I'm new to SQL and don't understand how to do joins and things like that, there are certainly some features in here where I can drag and drop and automate a lot of things and have it automatically generate the SQL. I think that's one of the nice things. Question that comes up all the time is, how does this differ from Microsoft SQL Studio Manager? I think the biggest thing, in addition to being multi-platform, is that all the SQL is exposed. So as you're doing things in a wizard-driven approach, again, if it's a new technology, a new vendor, or you're just new to SQL, all the SQL is exposed, and it creates it for you, which is a nice feature.
Yeah, and also allows you to debug it, which is, database engines or like languages, even within a single country, you can have different dialects. And so crossing that boundary of dialects, so, you get the kind of coffee you actually want to order is important. And so with your debug feature and the graphical design and exposing the SQL syntax, it's basically like a Google Translator walking around with you.
Yeah, and it's not just difference between vendors, it's also difference between versions. So if it's SQL Server 2012 or 2016 or 2017, the wizard will generate different code and will allow you to use or not use different features based on what's available, not just for the vendor, but for the version as well.
Okay, and then the last couple questions. So can you talk about which versions of database engines you actually do support and which ones you're planning to support?
Sure. So I'm here on the IDERA website, and the way you find DBArtisan is part of a product suite called DB Power Studio. So if you highlight under products, you can go to DB Power Studio. You can see DBArtisan. You can see Change Manager, which is a way of baselining and following changes through databases. Optimizer is an automated way of automating SQL statements. Rapid SQL is just the ISQL editor itself. But if I click on DBArtisan and tech specs, I can get the listed databases that are being supported right now. As far as what's in the future, I haven't looked at the roadmap in a little while, so I can't answer that question. I do know that, we've got 2017 here. That's fairly recent. Cloud is obviously big. I would say probably 40% of our customers right now are cloud-based. So keeping up with that is important. Obviously, keeping up with MySQL, that's an up-and-comer. I've seen a lot of shops switching from SQL Server to MySQL.
That's actually very interesting. And then how about switching in the same vein? Do you see the same proportion switching off of Oracle?
Oracle was a while ago. Oracle changed their licensing scheme about 8 or 10 years ago. And when they did that, it got prohibitively expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars per server. And a lot of companies switched from Oracle to something else. Microsoft SQL seems to be doing the same thing. They're changing their licensing model. And companies that were spending $10,000, $20,000 on SQL Server licenses are now spending $80,000 to $100,000 to $200,000 for the same functionality. And management is looking at that and going, that's outrageous. We need to get off this. And they're switching to either MySQL or MariaDB. We have another tool that's specifically MySQL that I'm also the pre-sales guy for, and probably 20 or 30% of the customers I talk with that are looking at a tool for MySQL are Microsoft SQL DBAs who are migrating to MySQL.
Oh, very interesting. And then I guess the last question, because we've run over a little bit, which is fine, is that I think you've already answered this, but it says right there, start for free. So anybody who
Yeah.
wants to play with this can just go on the website, click the button, and then you're off and running.
Yeah, let me show you that one more time. I'm on the IDERA.com page. I can go to products, I can go to Power Studio, I can go to Artisan, and there is a free downloadable, fully functional 14-day trial. If you have questions, our sales team will gladly take those questions, and if they can't answer them, if they're very technical questions, they get forwarded to me or one of my compatriots. If you do choose to download this and try it, we want it to be smooth. We want it to be fully functional. If you want a full demo, the full demo takes about an hour. I'll be glad to give any of you a full demo through all the features and functions as well.
All right, excellent. So with that, I think we'll close it off, and thank you very much for the presentation. And again, I'll encourage all attendees to keep sending in your questions, anything that comes into your mind. There is the contact information directly, or you can send it in through the contact information through the Techopedia website, and that'll find its way to the proper person. So again, thank you very much.